You're listening to School Counseling Simplified, a podcast with easy-to-implement strategies for busy school counselors. Here's your host, Rachel Davis from Bright Futures Counseling.
Hey there, have you joined Impact yet? Remember, this is my new membership program for school counselors where you'll get access to monthly class lesson plans, small group curriculum, and individual activities. Plus, you'll get to connect with me and other school counselors through live Zoom calls and in our exclusive Facebook community. Wouldn't it be nice to have someone plan all of your counseling lessons and activities, provide the resources to you each month, and show you step by step how to use them, when to use them, and who to use them with? If you're thinking, heck yes, then Impact is made for you. Your counseling life is about to get a whole lot easier. So what are you waiting for? Sign up today at stressfreeschoolcounseling.com/impact. Hi everyone, thanks for listening to another episode. So today we are going to wrap up our month of individual sessions, and we're finally going to talk about the individual session. So I've kind of saved the meat and potatoes for last year. We've talked about how to collect data, how to collaborate with a team, and how to do the basics of getting your individual sessions set up. But today I want to talk to you about what you're supposed to be doing during the individual session. So I mentioned in our first episode of this series that individual sessions were the most intimidating for me, and that I felt least comfortable and least qualified, I guess, to do those compared to group counseling sessions or class lessons. But they're oh so important, and I've come to learn to love them. But like most things, I feel most confident and prepared when I have a good plan in place. So I want to share that plan with you today so you can feel more confident and prepared with your individual sessions. So in the actual session, a couple things look the same as they do in a group session. So if you listened during March to our group counseling series, if you go back a few episodes, you can hear those. And I explain how the anatomy of an engaging small group, and I explained what I was doing. I did an actual walkthrough on YouTube. I'll link to it in the show notes. But it is a fun one to watch me kind of do a mock small group. But a few of the things from the groups are the same with the individual kiddos, and that is a feelings check. So I always love to do a feelings check. So I think it's so important. Take the time in the beginning to ask the students how they're feeling and why. Share yourself how you were feeling and why. That way you can model for the student, show them that it's a safe space and where they can feel vulnerable. And it's also honestly just a good check-in for you, because I don't know the last time you asked yourself, how am I feeling today? But it's a good one to do. So I like to start with a feelings check. Now, with my groups, I always do group rules. With individual students, you could do optional like ground rules or something. So that's up to you. I don't typically do that, but it is something you could do. Now, then I go into the main thing, which is the activity or what we're working on. So there's a few things you can keep in mind here. First, you can complement what you're doing in the group. So remember, you're going to have an area of need for your student, and these are your Tier 3 students. And Tier 3 means that they've either completed a Tier 2 intervention with you, like a group, or maybe they're currently in one. Sometimes I'll have a student who's in a group and I'm seeing them individually at the same time, just for that added level of support. So if that's the case, you can complement what you're doing in the group. So you want to look at their area of need. Perhaps they're in a social skills group, but then you're also seeing them individually for social skills. You want to, obviously not do the same thing you're doing in the group, but you want to make the connection there. Or if they've finished, let's say they finished a relational aggression group with you, and now you're seeing them one-on-one for some bullying prevention strategies, those kind of go hand in hand. So you want to look at what you did in the group and then reference that as you're working with them individually. So that's something to keep in mind. The other thing you want to keep in mind is your student's learning style. So some students are more, they like to read and write. Other students are more like kinesthetic learners, and they would rather do things. Other kids would rather act it out. So personalize it. You can have like a baseline of what you do with students. So let's say you've seen a student last semester to work on growth mindset and self-esteem, and now you're seeing a student to work on growth mindset and self-esteem. Well, if that's the case, you could, repurpose some of those activities, because I know it's difficult to find time to plan everything. But if you are repurposing activities, or maybe you're repurposing something you used in a small group, if that's the case, that's fine, but keep in mind the student's learning style so you can best figure out how to serve them. That being said, I do want to mention Impact, because that's my new membership that I've been talking about. And if you do find, yourself thinking like, I don't have time to personalize and plan these individual activities for kids, I feel like I never have time to plan things, look into Impact. It's stressfreeschoolcounseling.com/impact, or just DM me or send me an email and I'll send you some more info. But if you find yourself thinking that, I think you would really like Impact. That's my school counselor membership program where I provide you with resources each month across the 3 tiers. So I just wanted to mention that as I was kind of sharing, that feeling of repurposing content and planning and all of that. Okay, so moving right along. I have 4 examples of activities that you can do with individual students. So the first one is a journal. So you may think that sounds boring, but it can be really cool in an individual setting. So I did this recently with a student who was processing grief, and she didn't really want to talk about it so much as write about it. So there are certain topics that maybe students feel more confident writing about. So perhaps, grief, or if they're parents are going through a divorce, or if it's something trauma related that's hard for them to verbalize, have them write. You can give them, this is like a homework option where they would write outside of the session, and then you can read it together or discuss it during the session, or they can take some time to write during the session. You can turn some music on, kind of make it a calming experience, and then you can kind of discuss and debrief it after. Or maybe they're not ready to share it right then, but you kind of save it for later. But journaling is a really great way for students to process strong emotions and to work through things. Now, the second option is a workbook. So kind of similar to a journal, but this is a little more light. So this would be for students who are learning a new skill. So perhaps they're learning self-regulation strategies. You could use, I have a coping strategies journal that I love to use. I'll link to it in the show notes. But you could have the entire workbook out, and then students can, it has different things like coloring pages, mandalas, fill in the blank things, different things where they circle strategies. So just break it up, do a couple pages at a time out of a workbook. And that, that's an easy way to plan out your sessions. If you find a workbook that really aligns to what you're doing and what your goal is for that student, then you can, just break it up. If the workbook is 20 pages, divide it by your 5 sessions, do 4 pages at a time. Look at that math I just did on the spot. But something like that. That's a good way to use a workbook. Now, I mentioned breaking up and planning your sessions. In an earlier episode, I was talking about how you want to set a goal for your student. So you want each student to have a goal. So perhaps the goal is you want them to be able to learn coping strategies when they're feeling angry or in the red zone. If that's your goal, you then want to have an objective for each session. So session 1, they first need to know what the red zone is before they can identify coping strategies. So maybe in the first session, you're just identifying zones of regulation, doing an introduction. Maybe in the second session, you're talking about triggers. Maybe in the third session, you're talking about coping strategies, and so on and so forth. So identify a goal, a long-term or end of the session set goal, and then break it up into different objectives for each session. And I encourage you to write those down. You can even align them to the Ask Mindsets and Behaviors. This way you kind of have a clear plan and vision of what to do. Then when you're going to pick out your activities, you're just kind of filling in the blanks. So that's a more manageable way to plan individual counseling sessions rather than just sitting down and thinking, oh gosh, what am I going to do with this kid today? So that's how you can use a workbook. Then you could do a book club. So this is kind of fun. If you find, similarly to finding a workbook that aligns with your counseling topic, if you find an actual book, so maybe this is like a short story or a novel, depending on the age of the kid, it could be a picture book, whatever. But you can find the book, they read a couple pages independently before the session, kind of as homework, or you do it together in the session, and then you discuss it. So you could, have some writing prompts or discussion questions ready to discuss the book, and then they can make applications to their everyday life. So I love that example. And then finally, the fourth thing is using group activities. So perhaps I'm all about repurposing content because, like I mentioned, I know it's hard to find time to plan. But if you have like a board game or discussion cards from a group, that's totally something you can do if it's on the same topic. But there is, I want you to be mindful about sharing because, for example, if you're doing discussion cards, you don't just want them like draw an answer, draw an answer, draw an answer. You want to take turns drawing, make it like alternating, but then that has you answering the question. So you don't want to overshare. This isn't about you and you don't want to bring attention to you, but you do want to be an example and kind of model how they can use the cards. Same thing with a board game. If you play with the student, then when you land on a space, you have to answer. I remember leading a middle school girls group on body image, and we were doing the discussion cards, and they asked me, they're like, well, what's your least favorite body part or something? And I was like, oh, I was not expecting to talk about this in front of you girls today, but I had to model it. So that's just something you want to keep in mind. So those are 4 possible activities you could do: a journal, a workbook, a book club, or group activities such as a board game or a discussion cards. And you want to modify those based on your students' preferences, interests, and learning styles. The more engaging it can be, the more effective it will be. And when you're planning out this, you want to keep that end goal in mind and then break up each week into an objective. And if you can align it with, the ASCA mindsets and behaviors, then that's even better because an aligned session will allow you to show parents and teachers, that you have a plan. You're not just like willy-nilly meeting and chatting about things, that you have a clear plan and vision for their student or child's success. Okay, guys, that is wrapping up our individual session series. So I really loved doing this one more than I thought I would. I hope you enjoyed it as well. I would love your feedback. Please leave us a review on iTunes. The podcast is still pretty new, so I'd love to hear all of your reviews. I also wanted to mention, I have some exciting news. I am in the process of coming up with an individual counseling curriculum. So I have my group curriculum and I have like an SEL guidance lessons curriculum all in my TPT store, but I am working on individual curriculum and I am so pumped on it. So make sure you're on my email list. I'll link to it in the show notes, but be sure to join the email list so you can be notified right away when we launch this. I'll probably have like a special discount for the first 24 hours or something. So join the email list. That way you can make sure that we'll find out when we launch it, but this way you'll have something for every occasion. I'm really pumped on it and can't wait to share it with you guys. Okay, talk to you next week.
Thanks for listening to School Counseling Simplified. You can find the links from today's episode in the show notes. If you'd like to connect with Rachel, she's on Instagram and Teachers Pay Teachers at Bright Futures Counseling. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss any episodes of School Counseling Simplified. Talk to you next week.